A warm and friendly hello. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Heaps with myself, Greg Heaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by Riley Frain. He does such great work over at the Portal Report. Coupled with that, mid-major madness, we're going to be chatting with him about what we saw with those late NBA draft decisions and some of these mid-major teams that under the radar are having some really nice transfer hauls here in the offseason. Additionally, we're going to be chatting with them a little bit about what we've seen over the last few weeks in college basketball as well. You do have a few teams that I think are very much of intrigue, to say the least, and we are also going to be diving in terms of these conferences that they've really been falling off with regards to the NIL era. We're going to be talking about the fact that the Metro Atlantic has had a little bit of a rough go of things. Additionally, you've been seeing a little bit of a rough go of things as well out there in the NEC, but there is one team out there in the NEC that we both feel has a lot of upside and has really been doing things right here over the last year or two, so we're going to be chatting about that and so much more. And then we had a conference preview on the podcast yesterday. I was very, very happy to be able to do the Atlantic Sun conference preview, and we are back in conference preview season. We're probably going to be doing one a week for the next few weeks, and then they'll get a little bit more hot and heavy as the summer starts to wrap up and as we make the turn to fall. But we are going to be taking a look at the last 72 hours of college basketball news and notes because we only saw like one or two pieces of news in college basketball on Monday, so we're going to have a nice roundup there. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And while I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost, they're making sure that bettors are able to access their funds whenever and wherever you're able to earn cashback rewards as you utilize EdgeBoost. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, type in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That gets you a dollar for dollar match on your first deposit up to $25. And now let's chat with our good friend Riley Frain, who he's doing such an amazing job taking a look at this wonderful game of college basketball. You are able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at his first and last name, Riley Frain. That last name is spelled F-R-A-I-N. And Riley, it's great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Of course, Greg. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure getting on here and chatting with you. I know I've been on, a couple times the past maybe month or two. It's always a pleasure talking transfer portal with you.
It is always great to be able to have you aboard. And in terms of transfer portal, I feel like a lot of the big moves are already done. But with that said, over the last few weeks, we saw a bunch of big splash moves with the guys that decided to pull out of the NBA draft and decide to go elsewhere, like Boogie Flan going on over to Florida. Additionally, having Darion Williams going to NC State. I feel like those are two of the biggest moves that we've seen here in the offseason, and they happened very late and very recently.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you talk about Florida, the defending national champions here heading into next year, re-gearing with a guy, who's an NBA-type prospect, a former, I think top 15 recruit coming out of high school in Boogie Fland. Obviously a really good addition for them. And you look over at NC State, and it seems like they continue to, keep chugging away at the transfer portal with Will Wade. And it seems like, Darion Williams is going to cap that transfer class for them. But, if that's their final addition to wrap it up, I think they did a really good job this offseason.
Yep, I do agree with you. And I think that is just so massive for them. And with regards to this NC State team, I just take a look at them, and I feel like they've had perhaps the best offseason of any team in all of college basketball, because if you look at everything in totality, all the guys that they're bringing in via the transfer portal, Van Allen Lubin was a little bit of a late addition for them, obviously Darion Williams, but also upgrading the coach in Will Wade, bringing over some of those McNeese guys. I think that it's just so incredible what they've been able to do, because a lot of people will look at that Final Four run and they think that was really just an amazing run in general, and it was, but they weren't having the greatest regular season. They need to win the ACC tournament just to get into the NCAA tournament. Now I feel like there's stability where they don't need to get a 1 in a million shot to be able to make the Final Four anymore. They're just good enough to be able to do so without having 100 million billion things break their way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a program that certainly has a lot of basketball history to it, and I think Will Wade's a guy who could, bring some stability to it over the next couple of years. Certainly not to take anything away from that incredible Final Four run. But yeah, you see all these pieces they're bringing in. It's a roster up and down that is going to compete in a conference like the ACC, a really competitive team with a lot of talented pieces, guys who were competing in the NBA draft, guys who bring high major experience, guys who were really successful with Wade at the mid-major level, as you mentioned. Just a lot of interesting pieces here. I like what they're putting together. I think it's going to be a really competitive team. And yeah, I don't think they'll need much of a 1 in a million fluke to get to the Final Four once again, kind of like you mentioned, Greg.
Absolutely. Might be a little bit tough this year, not going to lie. If they make it to the
Yes.
Final Four this year, that'd be amazing. But you know what? I think that they're certainly on that northward trajectory, and I do like where this program is heading, and always love where things are heading when we've got Riley Frain aboard. He does such great work over at Mid-Major Madness, along with that, the Portal Report. He's going to be right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and certainly those were two big pieces that we saw over the last few days. But allow me to talk to you about this team. We saw a few days ago Bradley as a Wyro, hopefully I said that correctly, the gentleman from UAB and St. Louis go on over to San Diego, and it certainly feels like it's a put up or shut up year for Steve Lavin over at San Diego. But I think that low key they've had one of the better transfer portal hauls that not a lot of people are talking about. And after San Diego, I felt like they just completely whiffed on bringing in nobody from the Division One level in the portal last season. They've really done it right, and they put themselves in a position to be able to surge up the WCC standings.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it, Greg. They didn't bring in a lot of talent last offseason, and you see it in their record. I think they had just 6 or 7 wins. Certainly not ready to, jump back on the Steve Lavin hype train right away. I don't think he's had a ton of success since sort of stepping away from St. John's. Yeah, I had them on my list of winners here on some of the notes I wrote, before I hopped on the recording here with you, Greg. And just over the past couple of weeks, I mean, you mentioned Bradley Azuero, comes from UAB, was a solid role player there this past season, found a lot of success at St. Louis. But just over the past couple of weeks in general, they bought in Tyler Johnson from Wake Forest, who played some competitive minutes there as a sophomore there, this past season. I think he could be a really exciting addition, obviously stepping down to the mid-major level, with a team like San Diego. I think it could be a good spot for him. They bring in a guy like Tim Moore from NJIT, sort of taking a step up to the WCC, but really competitive there, averaged almost 15 points per game and a handful of rebounds, another big body they could sort of play in the front court, use on the wing a little bit. Top of that, Asan Diop, who's coming over from Colorado, was a really exciting prospect coming out of high school and didn't get a ton of minutes there, but, brings a little bit of high major experience. Again, another guy I'm excited to see kind of what he could do with a step down to the mid-major level, and I like sort of the pieces Lavin's been able to assemble, with the San Diego team over the past couple of weeks. Obviously, it's a really competitive WCC conference with sort of all the teams, that are at the top. I know they're going to lose Gonzaga pretty shortly. Definitely a San Diego team that I think could be, competitive in a year that they're going to need to be in order for, sort of Lavin to hang around there.
Yep, I do agree with you. I think that it's going to be a nice season for them in general, and I do think that there's a lot of upside moving forward for the San Diego team. As joining me on the show, we do have Riley Frain, who does such great work over at the Portal Report, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And are there a few other mid-major teams that maybe they had a really rough year last year that you take a look at them and you just feel like in general they've got a little bit of upside and you feel like they're really starting to build a little bit of something and could be able to improve this season?
Sure, yeah. A team that stands out right away that I think sort of fits that description to a T has to be George Washington. I mean, it's a team in the A10. It feels like they're in a market where they could be really competitive in Washington, D.C. They could bring in some good recruits down there and just sort of haven't found, a ton of success over the past couple seasons. But I like what the staff's been able to bring in this offseason from the transfer portal. I'll run through a couple names, but Boo Boo Benjamin, who's coming in from Tarleton State, I think is a really exciting prospect. They'll bring in Gene Aranguren coming over from my local Hofstra, who I covered a bunch this year, and I think could be a solid offensive weapon for them. Trey Dinkins coming over from Duquesne in conference, I think will add a lot of, veteran experience. He understands what it takes to compete in this league. I know Duquesne struggled a little bit last year, but worked really competitive defensively, and I think Dinkins can add a lot on that end for GW. They sort of rounded out with guys like Tyrone Marshall from Western Kentucky, and then a little bit of high major experience with Luke Hunger. So I'm looking at the TPR rankings right now, and currently we have them inside our top 25, which, for a mid-major program, we don't see a lot of them sort of in that top 25 rankings, but right now that GW program is one that's really standing out to me and sort of what they've been able to build this offseason. I think it could be a real turning point for them as far as, competing in the A10 and Chris Caputo sort of getting that program this past season. They finished with 21 wins the season before that, 15. I think this is a team where we could see them take another step up this year in the A10.
Yep, I do think so as well. And I think that the entire Atlantic 10 is such an interesting conference because VCU has really been the big bad wolf out there over the last few years. And I thought that they actually made a really nice hire with Phil Martelli Jr. But regardless, even though they made a really nice hire, you still do have a little bit of transition there. They've done a nice job of being able to add a lot of guys via the transfer portal as well. But I think that this entire conference, you do maybe have a few teams like a LaSalle, Davidson. I think that it's going to be rough for them. But I take a look at what a team like a Loyal Chicago Chicago has been able to do here in the offseason. I like them. And then you were talking about George. Well, how about the other George? George Mason has done a nice job of adding a lot of guys as well. And I think that Tony Skinn is just a guy that's able to do a little bit less with more than a lot of other coaches out there in college basketball.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on VCU. I'm a big fan of the Coach Martelli hire, and I love the staff he's assembled, and they've certainly had to be active in the portal to rebuild that roster. He's bringing over a couple guys from his past stop at Bryan. He's bringing over a couple guys with some high major experience. Jadrian Tracy, who was solid at Oregon, stands out. Jordan Dumont from Villanova, who was, a pretty highly rated prospect there. So I sort of like the ensemble of prospects they've been able to put together. You mentioned the other Georgian, Kim English. I mean, he's killing it in the portal for a second year in a row. Run down the entire list of guys they're bringing in, but just so much talent. I mean, Dola Adebayo is coming over from Mount St. Mary's with some NCAA tournament experience. Talking about a guy like Jermari Hill from Ball State, who averaged, almost 16 points per game in a solid league at like the single A MAC. Another guy I'm excited for, Nick Ellington, come over from Murray State, averaged almost 10 points per game and six rebounds. I think he could be a solid big body in the middle there. So I definitely like what sort of the top of the A-10 has been able to do, and I think you're going to see a lot of competitive teams. You mentioned Loyola Chicago as well. Even LaSalle, I mean, even like what they've been able to do in the transfer portal under their new head coach, Darius Nichols. He's got a tough job there at LaSalle. It's always a tough place to win and a tough place to recruit at that. But they've been able to bring in some guys who I think are really interesting. I like Jose Grullon from UT Martin, who's coming over, and I think could be a solid prospect there. He was an incredible scorer for the Skyhawks this past season, and he'll bring over a handful of prospects from his last stop in Radford. I'm excited to see overall what this LaSalle team can do. I think you won't see them in the bottom of the A-10 maybe like we have the past couple seasons. I know I certainly, no disrespect to the legendary Fran McCaffrey, but again, that LaSalle place is a really tough place to succeed, a really tough place to win, and I think they've been active in the transfer portal, and we've seen that translate to success for new coaches.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I think the LaSalle is really starting to do it right as well. I feel like they've done a nice job of just being a mix and match in general, and I do think that there's a lot of upside there. And in the Atlantic 10, I do think that there have been a lot of teams that have been able to do it right out there. And how about if we highlight a few conferences, because the Atlantic 10, they seem to be rising, but it feels like just the mid-major landscape, and I know that you do great work over at Mid-Major Madness, there's just a few conferences that seem to be left in the dust, and I want to get your thoughts here on a conference out there in the Metro Atlantic, which that's out there in your neck of the woods. It just feels like there's been a big fall off for them over the last few seasons in general, and I'm wondering what the solution is for them to get back to being one of those prominent mid-major conferences, because I just love the fact that they play on Fridays. They're one of the few conferences that actually do, and I want good Friday college basketball, but that said, it just feels like across the board, the Metro Atlantic just has not been the same conference over the last few seasons, and I've been a little bit underwhelmed by the teams in the transfer portal trying to be able to assemble things, aside from my own, who very much had a lot of urgency here in the offseason.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the MAC. I'm going to do my best Sam Fetterman impression here, who does great coverage of the MAC.
He's great, yes.
Madness. Of course, yeah, Sam is the best. I always love chatting up some MAC with him, but he sort of leads our coverage. I'll do my best to represent him here. But yeah, I mean, it's a conference we've seen struggle a little bit, but I think they are a conference that's going to sort of, as the transfer portal has grown, they're going to need to grow with it and take advantage of it. I think of a team like Manhattan, who I'm not too far from here, outside of New York City, who they sort of have taken advantage of the transfer portal last year with a new head coach and John Gallagher. They bought in a few bodies, but then this year they just haven't been as active in it. I mean, I think their only acquisition at the current moment is Terrence Jones, who's coming over from Norfolk State, a decent player who averaged about 7 points per game. But, you think of a school like Manhattan, who's had some success in the MAC in general, and just some success within New York City and the notoriety that can bring. And you'd like to see them, a little more active in terms of recruiting. And I mean, I know maybe with sort of how the transfer portal's grown and just how much, high major teams are benefiting from the transfer portal, maybe a conference like the MAC needs to sort of switch it up and go toward looking at more like freshmen who are sort of getting left in the dust as the high major programs look to fill out their rosters with, veteran transfer pieces who bring a lot more experience. So I don't know if I have the answer for the MAC right now. I think there's certainly a lot of development, for schools like that to be found in the transfer portal, but just, certainly not a lot of these programs that brought in a lot of pieces this offseason. I look at Canisius, who I don't think I think they had about 4 or 5 wins last year, if I'm not mistaken, and were sort of the bottom feeders of the conference. And currently, according to the Portal Reports rankings, they're the only school that's bought in 4 or more transfers from the portal. A couple interesting pieces, Max Jusanic, who's coming over from Mercyhurst, who, just finished their first season at Division I last year, and I think he could be a solid piece for them. And I like a guy like Khalil Singleton, who's coming over from Holy Cross, sort of taking a step down to the MAC and averaged some solid numbers there. But overall, I think I totally agree with you, Greg. I think the MAC is a place where they could find a real niche in the transfer portal, guys who want to take a step down from that top 7 high major conference range and find some success and some more playing time. And I think the MAC provides a lot of schools who are in interesting markets and some schools with a lot of college basketball history. And I think that makes it a really interesting sort of project. And I think it's something that maybe them gearing up and looking more into high school recruiting. But I also think there's a niche to be found in the transfer portal for some of these schools for sure.
Yep, no question about it. I do think that it's going to be interesting to take a look at the Metro Atlantic moving forward and the way that they're going to be looking to rise up in general. And staying out there in the northeast part of the country as well, certainly the NEC is leaving a little bit of something to be desired in the transfer portal as well. But I want to get your thoughts on one team in LIU, where I actually feel like it's been a really good offseason for them, because for LIU, it looked like they were going to be losing a lot of their top guys from a season ago, and they are still losing a few guys. That said, bringing in Greg Gordon, who we're talking about the Metro Atlantic, he was really good at Iona a few seasons ago. That's big. And then the addition of Jamal Fuller, because with regards to the portal report, you guys not just do a great job of looking that these guys are transferring, but these guys that enter the portal and come back. I thought that was a big piece of news for them over the last few weeks. And I really think that ever since LIU hired on a guy that I have a lot of respect for, Gerald Gillian, the former coach of Chicago State, that things have just been on the up and up for them. And I think that they're going to continue to ascend.
Sort of an interesting position. I'll call them my hometown team, but they don't quite play on Long Island. They're still technically in Brooklyn in the city. But I think it's interesting because I think Rod Strickland is a good coach in terms of the X's and O's. And you mentioned who he's brought on this offseason, and I think it's only helped on the recruiting side. I think it's helped them in terms of attention. I mean, you mentioned they're able to keep Jamal Fuller. I know you mentioned Malachi Davis. He's actually returning this year as well. So it makes LIU, I believe, one of just 3 teams in the country this year who are returning both of their all-conference selections, I believe, alongside Purdue, and there's one other that's escaping me at the moment. But, to be one of 3 teams in the country in the transfer portal era that's sort of returning 2 all-conference selections and then adding a handful of names from the transfer portal, that's obviously a huge recipe for success with, a coach like Strickland and sort of what they were able to do last year. And hands down, they're bringing back the most talent in the NEC just with those 2 names alone, in Davis and Fuller. Get up there a handful of times throughout the season to cover them. I'm excited to see this team this year, but, with Davis and Fuller returning alone, I'd have to imagine they're the NEC NEC preseason favorite heading into the season. I know we've still got a couple months to go before any of those polls come out or anything. But on top of that, another guy they're bringing in that I like is Isaiah Miranda, who's coming over from Green Bay. Sort of didn't play a ton this year, made just 7 appearances, has battled some injuries in the past, but he's going to add a lot of height in that front court alongside sort of Fuller on the wing, Davis leading the backcourt. I like some of the other pieces and some of the development we saw from their roster last year. Guys like maybe a Blake Lander, who I'm pretty sure is coming back for another year, and Jalen Lee, who's withdrew from the transfer portal and had a really solid freshman season as well. So I like this LIU team a lot. I think they don't run the NEC next year. I think it'll be sort of a failure with all the talent they're returning. But heading into the season, I mean, they have to be the preseason favorite at the moment, just with sort of Fuller and Davis returning alone.
Yep, I totally agree with you. I think that it's going to be a massive season for them, and I do think that they're going to be able to climb up the NEC standings after just a few short years ago. They were just so brutal. And Riley, I know that you're doing such a great job over at the Portal Report, and I have this question for you as well. What are you taking a look at now that we're in the middle of June? A lot of these guys have signed on. Are there still big moves to be had, or do you think that things are really going to be starting to slow down? And are there any teams in particular that you think might be still looking to make some moves here late in the process?
Yeah, so I think we're getting pretty late, and I don't know that we're going to have a lot of late moves left. I think the biggest thing from the past sort of week and really the past week overall that I'll mention was the number 1 overall transfer left in the portal, according to the Portal Report, ended up signing with Vanderbilt. That's George Kimbrell III out of Eastern Kentucky. Yeah. A big signing for them, so I'm excited to see what he could do at Vanderbilt. I think it was sort of a good way to wrap up their transfer class, and with that, they slide into the top 10 in our transfer rankings as well. I'll run through some of the names that they're bringing in as well. On top of George Kimbrell, they're bringing in Frankie Collins from TCU, a former top 100 prospect, has found some varying degrees of success at a handful of different levels. They're bringing in Duke Miles from Oklahoma, who's obviously got some high major experience. They're bringing in Jalen Washington from North Carolina, another highly rated prospect who has some high major experience and, definitely is looking for some more minutes with them. They'll bring in a guy like A.K. Okereke from Cornell, who I don't know if people know his story too well, but he was a walk-on Cornell and has ended up finding a ton ton of success there and ended up averaging like 14 points per game, and just does a little bit of everything there as sort of a 6'7" wing/forward. And so I like sort of everything that they've been able to. Mark Byington has been able to assemble here in his second off season. I think I'm excited to see how they sort of come together. On top of that, another school I think you need to look at what they were able to do over the past week. Desmond Cloud at Washington picked him up this past week. He was another one of the top 10 sort of remaining transfers in the portal heading into the previous week. Coming out of USC, really successful guy, averaged about 16 points per game, had tons of high major interest that seemed to just fall off throughout the offseason as he kept sort of waiting. And I know he maybe turned down a visit to Alabama earlier this offseason, so a really good pickup for Washington there. And then maybe another sneaky team I'd like to mention, doing a little bit of work late here in the portal, and I think there could still be another piece or two for them to add just by nature of having another scholarship left and needing to rebuild a good bit. Seton Hall, two of the guys they added this past week, Pat Sumernick coming over from Oklahoma State, didn't find a ton of success there, but another big body they can add into the front court, and he'll see some more minutes with Seton Hall this season, and hopefully a little bit of development heading into sort of his senior season as a veteran piece. On top of that, maybe the last team I'd like to mention, Texas A&M, who I thought has really closed out this portal session well. They ended up stealing Pop Isaacs right after sort of the draft withdrawal period, he was initially committed to Houston. He ended up decommitting, commits to Texas A&M late, and on top of that, they stole Rayshon Iggy from USC, who was available in the transfer portal a couple weeks ago. Ever since they added Bucky, they've done a really good job in the transfer portal, especially closing out late here. And I know he joined that staff a little bit late, so maybe a little bit of work still for them to be done. But just the past couple weeks, I think Texas A&M has sort of hit their stride in the portal for sure.
Oh, yeah, the Pop Isaacs ad was just massive for them. That worked out for all parties because I didn't think they was going to be a great ad over at Houston, but him over at Texas A&M, where I don't quite know what the style is going to be, but I know that they've got dudes. I know that is going to be a lot of fun to be taking a look at, and a man that does such a great job of being able to decipher it all is you, Riley. I know that you're hard at work over at the Portal Report, you're hard at work taking a look at things over at Mid-Major Madness, and so much more, so let the good people at home know what's on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just first, thank you so much for having me, Greg. I always do appreciate it. Always a blast getting talk a little transfer portal, a little bit about what's going on in our work at the Portal Report, and of course my stuff at Mid-Major Madness. You can find me on social media pretty much anywhere at Riley Frain, RILEYFRAIN. I do a ton of college basketball coverage, as Greg has pointed out, between sort of transfer portal coverage with the Portal Report and tons of sort of Northeast and East Coast mid-major basketball coverage with Mid-Major Madness. So, I know all your listeners are into college basketball, of course. That's why we're all here. And so if you're into any of that, come stop by and check out everything we're doing there. I've got lots of articles and analysis and reviews going on over there. So lots of good stuff.
Yes, absolutely. Riley is doing an amazing job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. And every single time he joins me, lends such great insight. So big thanks to Riley for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Coming up next, I did a conference preview yesterday for the Atlantic Sun, so we'll round up the last few days of college basketball news and notes. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It was great to be joined by one of our good friends in Riley Frain, who's doing such great work over at the Portal Report, along with Mid-Major Madness. Every single time he joins me, he lends such amazing insights. Did so once again today. So big thanks to Riley for joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And now it is that time of the podcast. I give you the last 72 hours of college basketball news and notes. We really didn't have a whole heck of a lot that happened on Monday. We only saw one or two players decide to switch teams, and yesterday I did my conference preview of the Atlantic Sun, and you're getting a conference preview for every single conference. We're probably going to do about one a week here in the summertime, and then when we hit fall, that's going to be getting a little bit more hot and heavy. Again, we're going to be going to low/mid majors first, and then the big boys, they're going to be at the end, but we did see quite a few big-time moves over the last few days, and this one I think is a solid one. Pat Sumernick, he was over at Oklahoma State last year, was averaging about 3 points, 2 rebounds per game, just has never really found his footing. He's bounced around from school to school. He's decided that he's going to Seton Hall. Now for Seton Hall, I still think that this team is going to struggle. I've got them dead last in my Big East right now, but you've got a guy in Sumernick that he was over at West Virginia a few seasons ago where he saw a little bit of run there. Like, he never was really able to get out there on the floor at Robert Morris either. Just a guy that has been roaming around. He gives you a little bit of depth, but again, for Seton Hall, where is the three-point shooting going to be coming from? Like, that was a big issue for Seton Hall last year. Yeah, maybe they weren't the world's greatest team on the glass, and I know that Shaheen Holloway always wants to have a good low-post presence, but, I mean, man, where are we seeing the three-point shooting? Adam Clark is not a three-point shooter. Elijah Fisher is not a three-point shooter. Stephon Payne is a low-post player. TJ Simpkins, he's a lesser shooting of the Simpkins brothers. Like, I'm really not seeing it right now with this team, and they're going to be a solid defensive team, but they've got no offense whatsoever, and that killed them last year. So, I'm yay verily to adding yet another guy in the transfer portal that is not going to help out with the offense. This is going to help, though. Bradley Ezewairo. We were talking about this with Riley in the last segment. He heads on over to San Diego, and for San Diego, they've had a nice portal haul here. For Ezewairo, 7 points, 4.5 rebounds per game for UAB last year. He really hit peak form a few seasons ago when he was averaging 12 points and 6 rebounds per game over at St. Louis. Not a guy that's going to pop it and lock it from three-point range, but this is a put-up-or-shut-up year for Steve Lavin, and right now they are sticking the resources in there for him to be able to put up. If he can't have any success with this roster, I really don't know what to tell him, because in the last few off seasons they really put nothing into the transfer portal. And this year you bring in Tim Moore Jr., rock solid big man over at NJIT, and that was really the missing ingredient, because they've added a lot of guards here in the portal. Tyler Johnson, who began his career over at Wake Forest and Louisville, he's able to give you a little bit of facilitation. Juan Sebastian Gorecito was a solid three-point shooter over at Ball State. Tunari Lane is a double-figure scorer from Georgia State. Dominic Built Ford Tough, 14-plus point per game scorer over at Southern Utah. Now you add in there Ezewairo. He should be able to help hit the glass for this team, and I absolutely love what he's able to bring to the table. So that is going to be big time for San Diego. You've got Cameron Simpson, who has decided that he is going to be going on over to Texas State. Was unable to get out there on the floor last season over at Central Florida, but he should be able to help out a team that has been a very much defense-oriented team. They've got a lot of switchability with Texas State. For Cameron Simpson, if you look at the recruiting rankings, he was not necessarily the most highly touted of guys, but that said, I do think they can come in there, be able to give them a little bit of presence. And for Texas State, it's been an interesting little bit of an offseason for them, because they do lose quite a few of their top scorers from a season ago, but I do think that this team is still going to be, I think the best word to put it is fine out there in the Sun Belt. As we've seen the Sun Belt not necessarily have like a whole bunch of rambunctious moves or anything like that. With Texas State, they've been a little bit more muted here in the offseason, and they haven't necessarily added a whole bunch of guys, but I do like the fact that they brought in Jalen Bolden a few weeks ago. He's a guy that was a nice double-figure scorer over at Louisiana Monroe, and then you've also got Mekhi Willis, who also is from Louisiana Monroe. Those two guys should be able to form a pretty nice tandem, and his team should be able to form a little bit of something, as well. As you've got Dior Johnson heading on over to Tarleton State. Last year for Tarleton State, everyone was injured for them. Like, I wish I could put it any other way, but literally everyone was injured for Tarleton State last season. This is really their second big add. Cypher Owens, a double-figure scorer from Lemoyne last season, is going to be coming in, and they do bring back some of those pieces from a season ago. Now, I still felt like they should have went with the interim coaching regime from 2 seasons ago. I do feel like going back to Billy Gillespie was a little bit of a mistake for them, but you're adding in there a guy in Dior Johnson who he's got upside. Like, this is a guy that was a former top 50 recruit. If I'm not mistaken, he went down to the junior college level and absolutely tore it up there a few seasons ago as well. Long and winding road for him, but I mean, he just wasn't able to find too much of a footing over at Central Florida. If he commits himself to this defense-oriented style of Tarleton State and is able to help the team generate turnovers, I think that this is a massive add for them. This is the sort of athlete that you typically don't get at Tarleton State. So nice big W there. And then I was doing my Atlantic Sun preview yesterday on the podcast, and this came down as I was doing my projector of finish. West Georgia's Sheldon Williams-Dryden, who it looked like he was going back to his home state at UW Green Bay. That was really the lone UW Green Bay pickup in the offseason for the transfer portal. He flips from Green Bay. He is back at West Georgia. West Georgia was going to be dead last in terms of my projector of finish prior to this news. It said they went up to number 8. Now, I don't think that West Georgia is going to be lighting the world on fire, but I mean, they had one double-figure score last year. That'd be Williams-Dryden, and he gave the team 17.5 points, 7.5 boards, a little bit over steal per contest at 6'6". He doesn't pop it from three-point range. That is going to be an issue for the team, but at the very least, the team has a little bit of hope now that Williams-Dryden is back in the fold and for UW Green Bay. Going to be a rough season for them, to say the least. And then we give our ode to Lane Kiffin Go Owls. AJ Smith, he was over at Charleston last season. He was able to, at Charleston, average about 11 points per contest, threw in there about 3 boards. He has decided that he is going to be going to Temple for for this Matt Fisher style, I do think that he's going to be a pretty good guard for them. As for Matt Fisher and Temple, they are always looking for these guys. They're able to stretch out the floor, they're able to bomb it, and be able to give you some good versatility in general. Now, for Smith, not necessarily a guy that's going to necessarily give you a ton of three-point shooting. Last year, he only shot 25% from three, but if you go back to his days at the Citadel, he shot more like 35% from three-point. So I do think that there's a little bit of untapped potential here. He was a nice starter over at Charleston, and he was a part of a Charleston team that was one of the better three-point shooting teams. So while he might not be the guy that is necessarily going to be absolutely lighting things ablaze from three-point range, he can help out someone like a Jordan Mason who comes in from UIC. They bring in someone like a Masai Gilliard who was over at Manhattan last season. So they do have some nice pieces there. CJ Hines, who comes on over from Alabama State for a Temple. I do think that they're going to struggle a little bit out there in the American Conference, but I do feel like they've added some nice pieces, and I think that this is big for them. And Elon, it looked like they were going to be in for a little bit of a rough season out there in the Coastal Conference. They get a really nice ad. Kepper Kalanzic. He last season was over at Albany. 8.5 points, 5.5 boards, a block, and a steal per contest. Looked like he was going to be completely out of eligibility. NCAA decided, hey, you're going to get some eligibility because we don't want to lose yet another court case. So, you know what, here we go. And for Elon, this team was really good last season. They were 14th in road two-point shooting percentage defense, 26th in the country in terms of rebound percentage. They lost darn near everything, but they bring in Chandler Cathrell, who was pretty solid over at Fort Wayne. He was averaging about 6 rebounds, 7.5 points per contest out of them. And then you've got Caleb Middleton, who's at 6'11", coming in from New Hampshire. That backcourt is going to be brutal for Elon, but now they've got something in the post, and Kepper Kalanzic, I think, is going to be a really good ad for them. And then how about the fact that you've got this guy, Paul McMillan, heading out over to Grambling. Not often that you see a 20-point per game scorer at the Division I level decide that he is going to be going down to the SWAC level, but all of a sudden for Grambling, things are looking absolutely amazing, as they did bring in Patrick Creighton. He was over at Florida A&M last season, and he has brought over some really good talent, and this conference all of a sudden looks really good. Bethune-Cookman, they've got some dudes that are coming in. You've got a bunch in Jackson State that's coached up by Mo Williams. He's been able to bring in some talent, and yes, that is the same Mo Williams that used to play for the Milwaukee Bucks and so many others, but you take a look at this Grambling State transfer portal call. Darius Ward was one of the best defensive players out there in the MEAC last season, coming in over from Coppin State. You've got Paul McMillan, a 20-point per game scorer, coming in from Canisius. Ricky Ballard is a guy that was over at West Georgia. He was able to see some good run with them. Roderick Coffrey, he's going to be following his coach on over from Florida A&M. Nice little mixer and shaker for them. Nazar Mohammed is a guy that is a 6'5" combo player that comes in from UTSA. Meet for the Roadrunners. So I really do think that they've done a good job there. And Salou Saye, it's not like he was like a dominator over at Alabama A&M, but they bring in a 7-footer from Alabama A&M. So love what Grambling State is building, and love what we're building here on this podcast, here on Coast to Coast Soups. If you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Soups, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcast: Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larsium, naming does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline, and the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Big thanks for Riley Frain for joining me in the last segment, and I'm going at you guys every single day, regular season and off season, on this podcast. I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.